Hello and welcome, history buffs. My name is Nick Hodges, and in this episode, I'll be reviewing a true classic, Lawrence of Arabia. I just want to say right off the cuff that I adore this movie. In fact, it is one of my absolute favorites, and in my opinion, as a film, it's perfect. It's perfectly shot, perfectly acted, perfectly scored. It has perfect writing, editing, directing, and I mean, just look at it. The imagery speaks for itself because it's absolutely breathtaking. I genuinely feel like I've been transported to another world whenever I watch it. If films are all about escapism, then Lawrence of Arabia achieves that perfectly. There have been very few films since Lawrence of Arabia that have captured that same sense of wonderment and spectacle with its cinematography and exotic landscapes. And no, poorly done CGI shite doesn't count.
Hey, how you doing?
However, as much as I love this movie, this is a channel dedicated to informing you guys about historical inaccuracies, and this film has loads. So when I point them out, please don't take them as examples of how I think they could have improved the movie, but instead consider how close did they get it right. This is Lawrence of Arabia. The real T.E. Lawrence has to be one of the coolest guys in history. If you look at his career, you could accurately describe him as a spy, a diplomat, a historian, a soldier, and an archaeologist. I would in fact consider him to be the real-life Indiana Jones, since what started his career was simply his love of history. Particularly medieval history, which he studied in Jesus College in Oxford in 1907. As a young man, he was captivated by stories of knights in shining armor, codes of chivalry, and epic battles. In 1909, Lawrence left England for a 3-month walking tour in Syria to study Crusader castles. This is for his thesis in college, and at the age of 19, Lawrence would walk 1,100 miles across Syria by himself. This was his first brush with the Arab world, and he fell in love with its culture and its exotic landscape. In 1910, Lawrence graduated with first-class honors, and he was able to get a position as an archaeologist, and he returned to the Middle East and stayed there for a few years. It was at his dig in Carchemish where he learned to read, write, and speak Arabic. Many of the local Arab workers at the dig site grew to respect this open-minded Englishman for his diligence and for his keen interest in Arabic society and customs. Lawrence also began to sympathize with the Arabs and their wish for independence from the Ottoman Empire, hearing about the injustices they had suffered from Turkish rule. Now, right around this time, Europe was beginning to see a military build-up, and alliances were being made between the most powerful nations. You had the Triple Entente, which was an alliance between Great Britain, France, and Russia, and opposed to them were the Central Powers, which were made up of Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So, feeling a little bit outnumbered, the Germans figured it would be a good idea to cozy up to the Ottoman Empire and establish a trade network between them in hope that possibly further down the line an alliance could be made. So whilst the Turks got modern military technology and training, the Germans could get their hands on Middle Eastern oil. A railway line was proposed and constructed called the Baghdad Railway, which was to connect all the way from Berlin in Germany across 1,000 miles through the Ottoman Empire to Baghdad in Iraq. And take a wild guess where that railway went past. None other than Carchemish, where T.E. Lawrence was. British intelligence approached Lawrence and recruited him as a spy. Figured that he could use his position in archaeology as a cover to gain some valuable intel on the railway, like how many trains were coming through a day, what supplies were they bringing in, and etc. So Lawrence did do this, and he did it exceptionally well. This put him under the British intelligence's radar for what would come later. Lawrence returned briefly to Oxford when in August 1914, Great Britain declared war on Germany. Now, he was unable to serve in the military because he was considered too short. This is actually one inaccuracy in the film because Peter O'Toole was like 6'2", whilst T.E. Lawrence was something around 5'5". Although this is an important detail, this inaccuracy is pretty forgivable. I mean, just look at these two, they really look alike. As far as I'm concerned, this film has perfect casting. Okay, maybe not perfect. I mean, for example, you have Emir Faisal, one of the most important figures in Arab history, and who did they give the role to?
English!
Yeah, they give it to an English guy and they brown-face him. Now, I know this was made in the 60s and it was a great performance by Alec Guinness, but I just feel that this important role should have been done by an Arab. However, I have to remind myself that this is Hollywood and it's not exactly like anything has changed today. So anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, so since Lawrence was unable to serve in the military, he was frantically searching for a position that would make use of the skills he had picked up in the Middle East, and it wouldn't be anywhere on the Western Front. In fact, you could say he was quite restless during this time because it wasn't until November when the Ottoman Empire joined the war on Germany's side did he finally become useful. Lawrence got the chance he had been waiting for and was stationed in Cairo as a military intelligence officer. So although Lawrence got the... Oh wait, sorry guys, someone's calling me. Hello?
You got that from my video, right? I mean...
Oh, hey Indy. Yeah, I did learn that from your T.E. Lawrence video. I just figured since you had a whole YouTube channel about the First World War, I could use it for my research.
Yeah, that'd be great. Because, look, we love what you're doing here. And I'll tell you what, I had no idea about that Waterloo movie you recently reviewed. And I think I speak for all of us that we hate Mel Gibson type historical movies about as much as you do. Anyway, I will make sure to send our fans over for you to learn more about the T.E. Lawrence movie. Yep.
Thanks, man. Guys, you should also check out the Great War channel. They have some fantastic content there. Alright, Indy, I really need to continue with reviewing this monster of a movie.
Yeah, well, I imagine so. Okay, cool. Take care, and we'll see you around, okay?
That was pretty cool. Glad you didn't mind me watching his stuff. So where was I again? Oh yeah, so although Lawrence got the opportunity he wanted as an Arab expert, he would spend the next 2 years mostly sitting behind a desk. During this time, Great Britain was failing miserably in its war against the Ottoman Empire, especially with the Gallipoli campaign. There was great concern that the victorious Turks would be free to deploy more of its troops to attack British interests in Egypt and especially the Suez Canal. As luck would have it, an Arab uprising had already begun, and in 1916, to delay any Turkish advance, the British government approached Prince Emir Faisal, the primary Arab leader at the time, and offered support to their revolution. The Arabs' function would be to sabotage railways and harass Turkish fortifications throughout the Arabian Peninsula. The Arabs agreed under one condition, that after the war, they would be given self-rule and create a single united Arab nation free from European imperial intervention. The British agreed mostly because they didn't think the Arab uprising had any real chance of succeeding, but at least it might distract the Turks for a little while.
If you want my own opinion, this whole theatre of operations is a sideshow. The real war is being fought against the Germans, not the Turks. And not here, but on the Western Front, in the trenches. Your Bedouin army, or whatever it calls itself, would be a sideshow of a sideshow.
Initially, the Arab revolt began rather successfully and had won a few victories, but eventually it grounded to a halt when they were faced with Turkish artillery and aircraft, something that the Arabs were too ill-equipped to handle. The British government figured that it was only a matter of time before the Arab uprising would be crushed. It was then that Lawrence was sent to Wadi Safra to meet Emir Faisal and appraise the situation.
Well, that won't be difficult. The situation's bloody awful. Their morale, if ever they had any, which I doubt, the Turks knocked out of them in front of Medina. With howitzers. They're fading away by dozens every night.
They were also low on weapons and supplies, but Lawrence's role as a liaison between the British and Arab rebels would help provide them with many of the necessities that they desperately needed. With British aid, the revolt could now continue and began to grow successful once again. After some time, the Arabs grew rather fond of this Englishman, who had demonstrated to them a keen interest in their ways. Bit by bit, they began to accept him as one of their own, and Faisal even went as far as to suggest the idea to Lawrence that he should dress like them. According to Arab custom, such a gesture would go a long way in Lawrence truly being recognized as one of them. However, despite the Arabs being successful with their raids against the Turks, the British were already beginning to break their promise in giving the Arabs independence after the war. A secret deal was beginning to take shape in London called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. In it, the British and the French would carve up Arab lands between them, with the French taking Lebanon and Syria, and the Brits taking Palestine and most of Mesopotamia. After many months of guerrilla fighting, a consensus was beginning to form amongst the Arabs that they needed a victory, an undeniable, decisive military victory against the Turks. The ultimate prize for them, of course, would be the capture of Damascus, the political heart of the Arab world. But how to get there? Emir Faisal and Lawrence began to hatch a plan that the first step towards achieving that goal would be the capture of Aqaba. Now, Aqaba was a port in the Red Sea that was occupied by the Turks, and, if successfully taken, its strategic position would allow an Allied offensive to push north to Damascus. Now, there had been attempts by the Royal Navy to take Aqaba before, but they had failed, and another attack by sea seemed unlikely. But to Lawrence, there was another way.
You are mad. To come to Aqaba by land, we should have to cross the Nefud Desert.
That's right.
The Nefud cannot be crossed.
I'll cross it if you will.
You? It takes more than a compass, Englishman. The Nefud is the worst place God created.
I can't answer for the place, only for myself.
In hindsight, we could look at this idea as a great tactical decision, which it is, since the Turks would never expect an attack from the land. But I completely understand why. We are talking about a vast, barren desert made up of roughly 40,000 square miles. The idea of crossing it was ludicrous. And that's exactly what Lawrence and the Arabs were counting on. For 200 miles they withstood intense heat and extreme dehydration before finally, on July 6th, they were within sight of Aqaba. Now, I apologize for breaking up the flow of this review, but I have to mention quickly that the battle we see in the movie is heavily dramatized. In reality, the actual fighting took place 40 miles away, and Aqaba itself was taken without much resistance. There's also another thing I have to point out. After the capture of Aqaba, we see Lawrence go to Cairo to inform HQ of their success. And yet, the British are shown to be completely oblivious of Lawrence's attack.
We've taken Aqaba.
Who told you to take Aqaba?
Nobody.
Sir.
Sir.
Then why did you?
Aqaba's important.
Why is it important?
This doesn't make any sense, because in reality, not only were the British aware of Lawrence's plan, not only did they approve it, but they were directly involved as well. The Royal Navy was actually bombarding Aqaba from the sea, whilst the Arabs attacked by land, making it a two-pronged attack. So, I don't get why General Allenby is giving him the third degree when he bloody well knew why Lawrence did it.
Then why did you?
Because you told me to.
Exactly. Thanks, Arnie.
No problemo.
So anyway, now that Aqaba had been secured, the big push to Damascus could finally begin. Whilst the British took a more direct approach with the Turks, Lawrence and the Arabs were given the task of hitting the vital Hijaz railway, disrupting Turkish reinforcements and supplies to the front. This tactic worked well, and after winning further battles, the British-led allies continued to push north, even taking the city of Jerusalem, which the Turks had completely abandoned. The next stop would be the ultimate prize, one that all the Arabs have been fighting for since the beginning.
They'll be coming for Damascus, which I'm going to give them.
That's all I want.
All you want is someone holding down the Turkish right. But I'm going to give them Damascus. We'll get there before you do. And when we've got it, we'll keep it.
Yeah, way to go, Lawrence. It's just a pity you didn't get there first, mate, though, isn't it? Yes, that's right. The Arabs getting to Damascus first is a common misconception, forever immortalized by this movie. The honor actually goes to the Australian Light Horse Brigade, who arrived on October 1st, 1918 at 5 a.m. There they chased the fleeing Turks out of the city and cleared the way for the Arabs to arrive at 7 a.m. Although I can't exactly blame the movie too much for this, since the real Lawrence also made this bullshit claim. However, you must understand that even though the Allies got there first, they were instructed to allow the Arabs to, quote-unquote, enter Damascus first, for obvious political reasons, and Lawrence obviously had his own agenda to push for Arab self-determination, which I will get to a little bit later in this review. And finally, this is where the movie pretty much wraps up. The Arabs are victorious, they set up the Faisal government, but are unable to hold the city due to petty tribal bickering, and leave, which is also wrong because they actually remained in power until 1920, but I digress. Lawrence is promoted to colonel and leaves the Middle East since his part in this campaign has now come to an end. but the inaccuracies I'll point out in this review have not. So, now that I've covered the history behind the real Lawrence of Arabia, I am now going to go over some of the inaccuracies this film has. Many of them don't exactly bother me since they were clearly made as a creative decision and in my opinion are justified within its context. However, there are a few that kind of push my buttons as a history buff, so here are the ones that struck me the most. Starting off with the smallest inaccuracy that I can think of, which are the machine guns used by the Turks. Now, I'm not exactly a weapons expert and I could very well be wrong, but that seems to me to be a Browning M19 1930 caliber machine gun used by the US in the Second World War. That was just the conclusion I made during my extensive research anyway. There are many others like that, but for the sake of time, I'm going to focus on the more serious ones, like how Lawrence seems to relish violence over the course of the film. For example, there's a scene where Lawrence recounts his experience of shooting Gassim.
I had to execute him with my pistol. There was something about it I didn't like.
Well, naturally.
No, something else.
I see. Well, that's all right. Let it be a warning.
No, something else.
What then?
I enjoyed it.
I'm sorry to say this because this is a really good scene, but this is really inaccurate. The real Lawrence was shaken by this experience. He didn't enjoy it in the slightest. This would haunt him for the rest of his life, but the movie shows him later enjoying the violence when the Arabs attacked the Turkish convoy. So to prove my point, here's an interview with Peter O'Toole talking about what the real Lawrence went through when he was forced to kill the man Gassim is based on.
Now, I met a man who was with him when he did it, and said that indeed he did do it very coldly and very methodically, and it was rather terrible because the man was down a well and he kept on missing him. And then he went out for a drive in the desert afterwards. He went for a walk, and this man, was very worried about him, went to look for him and found him behind a rock, crouched like a 2-year-old baby in the most terrible state of emotion. Now that could color my killing of this man in the film.
Of course.
I could imply what would happen afterwards, without stating it.
What he means by his implication is that the audience could see the beginning stages of Lawrence suffering from PTSD or battle fatigue, which he most certainly did. But rather than Lawrence killing for pleasure, in reality, he was a lot colder and methodical about it. For example, the scene where Lawrence and the Arabs visit a Fas where the retreating Turks had massacred the entire town is true. The order he gives where he says, "No prisoners! No prisoners!" is also true. And the ensuing carnage of the Turks being cut down mercilessly, even whilst trying to surrender, is true again. But when we start seeing Lawrence smiling and enjoying the violence, that's when things become inaccurate. The real Lawrence was furious by what the Turks had done. We should see rage on his face, not a smile. In the book 7 Pillars of Wisdom, T.E. Lawrence himself wrote, "The Arabs were fighting like devils, the sweat blurring their eyes, dust parching their throats, whilst the flame of cruelty and revenge which was burning in their bodies so twisted them that their hands could hardly shoot. By my order, we took no prisoners, for the only time in our war." Now, although I quoted Lawrence's own words from his book, I feel that it would be irresponsible of me not to point out another scene in the movie based on what he wrote, which has become the subject of much controversy. It's when Lawrence is captured in Deraa by the Turks and is raped and tortured. Many historians seem to believe that he made up the story entirely.
I think that Deraa was an invention. It never happened to my own research, to my mind. I went myself to Deraa later on, and I met people, and I spent 2 nights in the Huran around Deraa. And I am convinced he never went to Deraa. It never happened. It was an invention.
I don't think the rape at Deraa happened in the way that Lawrence suggests it did. I think that Lawrence probably had some sort of homosexual encounter